In part 1 of this series, I described some stances that a beginner student up to 7th cup green tag should know. And in this video, I'll describe some more stances that a 1st cup black tag should know. So in this video, I'll describe some more stances, including closed stance, low stance, fixed stance, rear foot stance, vertical stance, and X stance. And I'll describe some ready stances, including bending ready stance type A and some closed ready stances, which are used in patterns performed by colour belt students. So let's start with closed stance, which is an easy one to describe. Just place your feet together and stand with the legs straight. So obviously your feet will be pointing forward and the weight distribution will be 50% on each leg. So there's no left or right version of this stance. The stance is useful for blocking and attacking, especially at close range, and it can be used in a full facing or a side facing position. And closed stance is also widely used for ready postures, which I'll show you later in this video. Low stance, nacho asogi, is almost the same as walking stance, except that it's longer. So the front foot will be pointing forward and the rear foot will be pointing outward, but not more than 25 degrees. The width is 1 shoulder width measured from the center of the instep of both feet, and the length is 1.5 shoulder widths long, but it's measured from the heel of the front foot to the toes of the rear foot. This makes it 1 foot length longer than walking stance. And like the walking stance, the weight distribution is 50% on each leg. The front leg is bent, but because of the extra reach compared to a walking stance, the knee doesn't quite reach the line above the heel. The stance is mainly used for getting reach on the attacking techniques, but rather than leaning forward to get reach, it's more stable to extend the stance and keep the body vertical. The front leg determines whether the stance is left or right. So if you have the left leg in front, it's a left low stance, and if you have the right leg in front, it's a right low stance. Low stance is usually done in a full facing posture, but it also can be done in a half facing posture. The fixed stance, Goju Sogi, is formed in a similar way to L stance. Like the L stance, the rear foot turns out to the side to form an L shape, and the toes of both feet are turned in by about 15 degrees. The inside of the big toe of the front foot lines up with the heel of the rear foot. Like the L stance, the length is about 1.5 shoulder width, but it's measured from the big toes of both feet. Notice how this is different to L stance, where it's measured from the big toe of the front foot to the foot sole of the rear foot. This makes the fixed stance longer than the L stance. As the rear foot is turned in by about 15 degrees, that extra length will be slightly over 1 foot width. The weight distribution will be 50% on each leg. Both knees are kept bent, but the knee of the front foot remains in line with the heel of the front foot. The knee of the rear foot will be slightly further in to the line above the toes of the rear foot. The body should remain vertically upright, and as the weight distribution is 50% on each leg, it is the front leg that determines whether the stance is left or right. So if you have the left leg in front, it's a left fixed stance, and if the right leg is in front, it's a right fixed stance. And like L stance, it can only be used in a half facing position. The rear foot stance, Tuit Balsogi, is a useful stance because you can easily make adjustments to the distance from your opponent by adjusting your front foot. The rear foot points out to the side and the toes are turned in by about 15 degrees. The toes of the front foot point inward by about 25 degrees and the heel is kept off the ground. The heel of the rear foot will be slightly beyond the heel of the front foot. The distance between the small toes is 1 shoulder width. Nearly all the body weight is transferred to the rear leg, so the weight distribution is no less than 90% on the rear leg. The front foot will touch the floor slightly with the ball of the foot, and it will have no more than 10% of the body weight. And the rear leg, because it carries the most weight, determines whether the stance is a left or right stance. So if the right leg is at the rear, it's a right rear foot stance, and if the left foot is at the rear, it's a left rear foot stance. This stance can only be positioned in a half facing position, not full facing or side facing. Vertical stance, Sujik Sogi, is formed as an L shape, but the toes of both feet are turned in by 15 degrees. The foot sword of the front foot lines up with the heel of the rear foot. The distance between the big toes is 1 shoulder width. The weight distribution is 60% on the rear leg and 40% on the front. Make sure you keep both legs straight and keep the body vertically upright. As most weight is on the rear leg, This determines whether the stance is left or right. So if you have the left leg at the rear, it's a left vertical stance, and if you have the right leg in the rear, it's a right vertical stance. The X stance, kyochasogi, is formed by crossing one leg over the other. The stationary foot could be either at the front or at the rear, but I'll describe the one where it's at the front because that's the one used in Yulgok-tul. The other version I'll describe in part 3 of this series because that's the one used in many of the black belt patterns. The stationary foot points directly forward and the rear foot turns in slightly. The front leg carries no less than 90% of the weight. The other foot touches the ground slightly with the ball of the foot and carries no more than 10% of the weight. The stationary leg determines whether the stance is a left or right X stance. So if the stationary leg is the left leg, it's a left X stance, and if it's the right leg, it's a right X stance. The stance is very versatile because it can be used in a full facing, half facing, or a side facing position. Now I'll describe some ready stances that are used in patterns practiced by colour belt students. In Wonyo-tul, the ready posture is closed ready stance A, Moa Chumbi Sogi A. This is formed using a closed stance, and the hands are formed by overlapping the right fist with the left hand. Make sure that each fingertip on the left hand touches the main knuckle of the corresponding finger on the right fist. The fist is placed in line with the philtrum at a distance of about 30 centimeters. In Chungun-tul and Teige-tul, the ready posture is closed ready stance B, Moa Chumbi Sogi B. Again, this is formed with a closed stance and the left hand covers the right fist as with closed ready stance A, but the fist is placed in line with the navel at a distance of about 15 centimeters. The ready posture for Farang-tul is closed ready stance C, Moa Chumbi Sogi C. This is a closed stance with the left hand overlapping the right hand in front of the abdomen. To position the hands correctly, make sure that the thumb of the left hand touches the main knuckle of the right middle finger. The middle fingertip of the left hand touches the third knuckle of the right middle finger, and then bring the fingers and thumb together for both hands. The hands are placed in front of the abdomen at a distance of about 10 centimeters. Bending ready stance A, Guburyo Chumbi Sogi A, is used in Wonyo-tul and Yulgok-tul as a ready posture in preparation for a side piercing kick. It's a variation of bending stance which I'll describe in more detail in part 3 of this series. It's formed by standing on one leg with the knee bent. The raised leg is bent so that you can bring the foot sword close to the knee joint of the stationary leg. The body is kept in a half-facing position and the arms are kept in a forearm guarding block position. If the stationary leg is on the right, it's a right bending ready stance, and if the stationary leg is on the left, it is a left bending ready stance. So in parts 1 and 2 of this series, a colour belt student has enough information about stances to study for a black belt grading. And if you want information about the remaining stances in Taekwondo, look out for my third and final video on this series. And please, remember to subscribe to my channel.